He was some hunk with long, greasy hair, some rock and roll dude with a tan skin tone. Well, guess what? That was a fake picture. We found out that it was a rock and roll legend, and Rivers of Bleeding actually used that as his profile picture for many years and tricked people into thinking that was what he looked like. All the while, he looks like a bag of floppy, saggy potatoes. All right? And he lives in his mom's basement. How you doing, Rivers? I know you're listening. So anyways, Rivers of Bleeding put that theory out. And I know that some other IOers have adopted that theory, but it's wrong. It's flat out wrong. Okay? The story's clear. The story was set from the beginning. Remember when Jesus in Matthew 24 commissioned them to go to the ends of the earth and seek his elect from one end of heaven to the other? Well, do you think that was just speaking of Judea? Do you think that at that very point in time, Jesus didn't know about the sheep in the sheep not of this fold, or the sons of God scattered abroad? Give me a break. Give me a break. Of course he did. And he commissioned them at that very moment in Matthew 24 to go to the ends of the land, the ends of the known land, not the ends of Judea, the ends of the known land, and he would seek his elect from the four winds of the earth. That's collectively the entirety of the chosen ones in this ideal story. That's collectively the entirety of the 12 tribes of Israel. So we see that very clearly, do we not? Of course we do. Okay, of course we do. There are no changes in this story. The story, as far as the New Testament is concerned, is very, very consistent. There's no changes. Now, someone might say, well, what about all the language, right? When Paul comes or Peter says, and now salvation is gone to the Gentiles, which is actually to the nations, right? What about that? Because, it seems as though Peter is surprised. Peter is shocked. Peter is, amazed that suddenly the Holy Spirit is falling on individuals out in these nations, right? It seems as though places like in Acts where it says, because you guys have rejected, now we go to the nations, or now we go to the Gentiles. It seems as though the story is wanting people to think that there's this radical change and God changed his mind and all of a sudden is now allowing pagans into this salvation mission, right? Well, no, that's wrong. And that's where the story gets a little tricky. That's where it takes a little bit of intellect and a little bit of thinking and critical thought to weed out these ideas and come back to reality. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that the story as a whole, from God's perspective, from Jesus's perspective, if you look at their perspective and take the perspectives of the apostles out of the equation, hold on, I'm going to turn here. There you go, buddy. If you look at the story from God and Jesus's perspective, there is no surprises. There are no changes. The story remains the same. The message remains the same. There's nothing that would shock anybody. Because from the very onset, Jesus said that he came only for the house of Israel. He said that he came for the sheep near and the sheep afar off. He said that he died for the nation, but also for those scattered abroad. He said that he would seek out his elect from the four winds of the earth. He told his disciples that they would go to all nations before the end would come and preach the good news to those who needed to hear it. So the nations and the ones scattered afar off were always in the picture. They were always in the picture. But what happens is people forget that, and they go to these letters of these apostles, and they immediately take the perspective of the apostle, and they forget the perspective of the big guy. They forget the perspective of the head honcho, that being Jesus, that being God in this story. They're the head honchos, all right? So they forget that perspective, and they look at the perspective of Paul or of Peter, and they say, look, something new is happening, all the while forgetting that all of this was declared by the head honchos long before any of these apostles wrote any letters. Supposedly, according to the story, of course. Sorry for the rolling water bottle. So that's what I want people to really think about. Perspective, okay? If you're going to quote a passage from Paul or Peter in Acts or whatever it is, and you're going to say, look, they were surprised, or they made a statement that sounds like there's a radical change going on here, and now the message is going to someone new. Well, no, because you got to remember that before all that supposedly took place, I mean, who would dare argue that the letters written by the apostles took place before Jesus' ministry? No one would argue that, right? The truth of the matter is, according to the story, that Jesus walked the earth long before those apostles wrote those letters. Years before, okay? And his message was why they were writing those letters, right? Without Jesus supposedly roaming the earth and saying all these wackadoodle things, those apostles would never have written those letters. Those letters and what those apostles are talking about are a direct realization of what Jesus talked about some 10, 20, 30 years before that, whenever it was. So my point is that if you look at the foundation, what Jesus said during those years, you can see that the mission was already laid out. The mission was already there. And it did not only include the Jewish Israelites. It also included the paganized Israelites. Okay? So there are no surprises. We need to get our perspective in check and realize that just because you read something like salvation is now going to the nations does not negate the fact that already, long before that, the story was established. And if we kept our anchor text in the water at all times, we would not drift a to and a fro. Anyways, folks, that's where I'm going to leave it today. Hope I gave you some stuff to think about. Hope you'll chew on it a bit. Remember, chew up the bones and spit out the meat. Okay? And I know that's backwards, but that's how we do it here. We chew up the bones and we spit out the meat. Because when you chew up the bones, you sharpen your teeth and you're able to rip into things. I don't know. That didn't really work. But anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you liked it, give it a like.